Hi, this is Chris from Nina, and responding to some of the videos I've been listening to on nihilism and trying to understand some of their ways of thinking and philosophy, and trying to refute some of their ideas, because of the fact that it sounds like their philosophy in some sense to them seems very logical, even though they don't try to base their thinking as what I've heard in some people's listening to some of the philosophy that's out there and ways of thinking that logic to them that doesn't necessarily have any type of purpose to them or meaning, and that in itself is based on the fact that to them it's all subjective and more based on preference, which I don't have a problem with. Which I do have a problem with is the fact that because of the fact that they are even on YouTube, kind of in my mind conflicts to which of some of their belief systems and some of their ways of thinking and their philosophy. To me, that being on YouTube represents a preference that would be based on desiring to communicate with other people, which wouldn't be so bad. However, in some of the videos that I have seen, people want to be, they've worded that they were misunderstood, and so they're wanting to communicate to people to correct them in their understanding of where their philosophy is. That in itself is not correlating to their ways of thinking and their philosophy, because that would have no preference and no desire for a person who is in nihilism to even care that what a person, their misunderstanding. And so to even go in that direction, to me, is not correct thinking at all in my mind. Another thing is that I think that going along with people and trying to connect up with people and finding out what they believe as truth is not possible in nihilism, because of this very reason. And everything is subjective, so you cannot really connect up with people when you have nihilism, in my mind, in the way of that thinking, when you think of it in the purest sense, because of the fact that everything's subjective. So then you wouldn't really have any kind of true dialogue in nihilism, in my mind, because of the fact that I don't have to believe in what you're thinking and you don't have to believe in my thinking, and so ultimate communication ends up being futile in itself. And that's why, to me, nihilism could never really be true in a sense of any type of communication, for that very reason. Preferences can be towards the idea that you prefer to talk to somebody and desire to, and that sounds understandable in the short term. However, in any type of long-term ideas, that can never be sustained because of being subjective, and so you could never maintain any type of communication, because of the fact that ultimately you can never connect up with any type of person, because of the fact that their subjectivity would be not in line with my subjectivity. I could never have a true dialogue without having some type of agreed upon preference of thinking, or agreed upon preference of communicating. And so to me, I think this is a loop that could never be sustained, and so to me, nihilism is futile in itself, in having to have any type of dialogue. So a true purist, when you're thinking, in my mind, a nihilist, if going in this direction, would be somebody who basically doesn't want to communicate with people, and if they do want to communicate, it would be more in a preference that they desire to, and not because of the fact they actually want to be listened to, because that would be too much, trying to get to a point where you're trying to actually communicate and be in a point where you're actually trying to be understood, and you're actually trying to understand the other person, which is futile in the nihilistic train of thought. The last point I would like to point out is that I think that nihilism can never be a person that can be valued in some sense by a person who is an atheist, or even agnostic to some degree, based in some ways because of the fact that an atheist chooses to be involved with other people for the other reasons that I've earlier mentioned. What's missing out on people that are nihilistic, in my mind, the train of thought is that because of the fact that everything's subjective, you don't look at other people's as having value in their train of thinking, specifically since that I've a good example of an atheist that actually can learn from people is that I've seen atheists actually have discussions and have been out talking to Christians or other ways of thinking or agnostics, and actually have discussions because of the fact that they think that it allows them to help them in their own thinking and help them in their own belief systems, where nihilists will never go that direction because of the fact that that causes them to be too subject to other people's ideas and the ways of thinking, from which that's the way I understand it. That I may be wrong to some degree. I mean, you could choose to allow yourself to be affected by other people, and that would probably be a choice you could make. However, again, there's the idea that too much dialogue could create too much of an influence that would be to get to a point where you would actually get out of your own trains of thought, and it would get too close to being external thinking rather than your own subjective thinking. And the risk of that, I think, in some ways to a nihilist would be too great, where an atheist doesn't have to be afraid of that because of the fact that their main concern is that they just don't believe in God. They're not concerned about the fact that they're going to can be swayed in other areas or in other kinds of truth or or other kinds of ideology, and that being of one being moral or not moral, which I'll probably get on another subject. So that should be about it that way. The one thing I just want to point out is that I do think that looking at other people's perspectives is a big key in terms of bettering people's philosophies and bettering people's ways of thinking, mostly because of the fact that each person has their own perspective and a different way of looking at the world because of their upbringing and what their situation is at the moment, and because of that very reason and their makeup. For that very reason, I think it's very my preference, basically, that I do listen to other people, and that allows me to have a better look at what truth really is, because I do value truth more, because it allows me to make decisions based on things that are more realistic and what's really out there. And I will go on that another time. That's it.